চলে এনে দেন
এখানে বলতে একটু এদিকে রাখলে ভালো এই যে আপনারটা ওই দিক দিয়ে নাইলে পাইবেন না পরে ঘুরাই দিয়ে
আচ্ছা দিন
কথা বললেন না ইয়ার সময় হ্যাঁ কথা চলে আসবে
Good afternoon. May I ask everybody to get seated and the cameras to go on their tripods, please, so that we can start with this press conference. While the cameras sort out their final location, I would like to make one announcement. Since the EU election observation mission is, at the end of the day, a European Union entity, we have to adhere to European regulations and laws, and that includes protection of privacy. So we are live streaming this event on Facebook. Photographs are being taken, and the material might be used for any publications within the European sphere. So if you do not want to be on a photograph, I kindly ask you to find a seat on the from my side on the right-hand side in the back. That's where you have kind of a dead corner. Thank you very much. And can I also ask the photographers in the front to find their spot? Good afternoon, and thank you very much for attending this press conference of the European Union at the occasion of the presentation of our preliminary statement. Allow me to introduce our head table. We have here in the middle our Chief Observer Ivars Ijabs. Next to me is Mr. Tomáš Zdechovský, and on the far end we have our Deputy Chief Observer in Tallasse. And I pass now the floor to our Chief Observer.
Yes, thank you very much, Eberhard. Good afternoon, Excellencies, my fellow MEPs, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed members of the press. I would like to begin by expressing my sincere gratitude to Bangladesh Election Commission and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for inviting the European Union to observe this historic election. By accepting this invitation, the European Union has underscored its unwavering commitment to Bangladeshi democracy. We Europeans see Bangladesh as an important and reliable partner that shares the same values of equality and justice. I also wish to extend my thanks to the state institutions, the judiciary, civil society, security services, the media, political parties, and the people of Bangladesh for their openness and cooperation throughout our presence here in the country. It has been an honor for the European Union Election Observation Mission to be part of this pivotal moment of Bangladesh's history. Before I start with our assessment, I would like to stress some key points. First of all, these were the first credible elections since 2008, a testament to citizens' commitment to restoring democratic governance and the rule of law. This is renewed momentum, and it paves the way for the next phase of reform. Secondly, these elections were genuinely competitive and pluralistic, and the young people who led the 2024 uprising had their first opportunity to reshape the country's democratic trajectory. Thirdly, the professionalism and resolve of the Election Commission, of the Bangladesh Election Commission, has to be acknowledged. The Commission worked independently and transparently, while the commitment of election officials to uphold democratic standards has set a new benchmark for future elections in Bangladesh. However, disinformation, the ever-present fear of mob violence, and the strikingly narrow political space given to the women harmed the democratic process. I trust that the newly elected leaders will have the strengths required to make women's choices heard in the political arena. Ladies and gentlemen, now a few words about the EU Election Observation Mission. Our mission started at the end of December. In mid-January, we deployed already our 56 long-term observers to all 64 administrative districts of Bangladesh. For election day, our mission has reinforced with 90 short-term observers arriving from Europe and Canada, and 35 locally recruited diplomats from EU member states and partner countries. A delegation of members of the European Parliament further broadens our scope of observation. At full force, there were more than 200 EU observers from all EU member states, as well as from Canada, Norway, and Switzerland. On election day, EU observers visited 1,805 polling centers all across the country, in cities, towns, and villages. After the polls were closed, our teams observed the ballot counting, and late at night on the 12th of February, all were present at the tabulation of the results. As you can see, this was a large-scale operation that has produced an independent, fact-based assessment on the extent to which these historic elections were conducted in line with international standards and national law. And now, ladies and gentlemen, let me present you our preliminary findings. I will start with reading out the first summary paragraph of our report. First, the 2026 parliamentary elections were credible and competently managed, marking a pivotal step towards restoring democratic governance and rule of law. For the first time since 2008, elections were genuinely competitive, conducted under a renewed legal framework that largely accords with international standards and with fundamental freedoms broadly respected. Sporadic, localized political violence, however, often triggered by manipulated online narratives, harmed the democratic process, while the strikingly limited political space allowed to women undermines their.
The Bangladesh Election Commission worked independently and transparently, maintaining the confidence of stakeholders and upholding the integrity of the polls. Now let me move on to the more detailed assessment. Let us start with the assessment of the laws governing the elections. The mission has concluded that the electoral legal framework is conducive to the conduct of democratic elections, and that the 2025 amendments strengthening inclusion and credibility. However, further reform is needed to enhance legal certainty and to close loopholes that diminish institutional accountability and transparency. We saw the recently appointed Election Commission adopting a proactive approach to rebuilding public trust in the elections. And we note the support that was afforded to the Commission by the interim government and other stakeholders. The Commission worked transparently, responded promptly to media queries, shared information of public interest and maintained dialogue with political parties. However, there were also some setbacks. For example, the stringent campaign rules were not consistently enforced, which at times was feeding perceptions of bias and contributed to grievances voiced by many political parties, including also two major coalitions. The Commission delivered election day preparation professionally and on time, lending credibility to the polls. 770,000 voters living abroad were enfranchised to a postal ballot. The training of more than 850,000 polling staff was well delivered, and the distribution of materials went smoothly. On election day, we saw dedicated poll workers who managed their voting efficiently. We also witnessed a constant presence of party agents from both major coalitions, which enhanced integrity. Regrettably, most voting places were not accessible to voters with reduced mobility, limiting their right to independent participation. Vote count and tabulation of results was competently handled, yet some integrity safeguards were not uniformly implemented. Whilst efficient, the requisite checks were not always performed during ballot counts, and in 3 cases observed by the Electoral Observation Mission, tabulation lacked transparency. On the positive, party agents could follow the process, and regular updates on constituency results were released by returning officers, which helped to build public confidence in the accuracy of these results. It is important to stress that the foundation for these genuinely competitive elections were laid already during the candidate registration process. The Election Commission efficiently handled more than 600 appeals and reinstated 2/3 of appellants, upholding the right to stand, which is a fundamental right in a truly democratic election. More than 2,000 candidates were on the ballot, which meant voters were offered a broad range of political alternatives. Our observers were present in more than 200 campaign events. We talked with lead candidates and parties in the capital and in the districts, followed up on reports about irregularities, and analyzed their digital campaigns. Based on this wealth of knowledge, we can conclude that the campaign was dynamic and candidates enjoyed freedom of assembly and of expression. We also note that by the end of the campaign, the rhetoric heightened and focus shifted from policies to personal insults and mutual allegation of misconduct made during the rallies and amplified on social media. Intra-party conflicts and local patronage networks also affected the playing field in some constituencies. And here I would like to draw your attention to a notable setback of this historic election. Women stood at the forefront of the July mass uprising. They were fearless, calling for good governance and eradication of corruption. No, just 21 months later, women candidates were almost invisible in these elections. This is regrettable. Only 4% of the contestants were women, which evidences a clear lack of political will to advance women in national politics, even as there is a commitment to do so in the July Charter. Other deterrents to women participation included patriarchy, discrimination, digital harassment, and character assassination. We spoke to many representing indigenous communities and religious minorities. days. Here in Dhaka, in Chengdong Hill Track, in Sylhet, and in many other places, sadly they felt estranged from these elections as their hopes for change remain unfulfilled. They were disappointed at the absence of special measures to ensure their political representation and about the increasing religious overtones within public discourse, including online. Sporadic political violence peaked during the first week of February, but the impact of these incidents remained localized and did not indicate any systematic pattern. The EUM, our electoral observation mission, received reports at least 56 campaign-related incidents involving physical violence, resulting in at least 200 casualties in 27 districts. Episodes of intimidation and harassment of campaigners, particularly women, and attacks on property were also reported to us. And let me stress here, even if those accidents were localized, any type of violence, be it physical or digital, has no place in democratic elections. Our condolences go to the families of all the victims. The online campaign for the 55.6 million strong youth vote was fierce, leaving little space for respectful political debate. Our social media monitoring unit identified at least 23 viral disinformation incidents with manipulative content reaching at least 1 million views each within 24 hours. Influencers and deceptive media accounts were the prime vector of disinformation on Facebook and on TikTok. Some of them were from outside Bangladesh, but the majority originated in Bangladesh. It was encouraging to see how national fact-checking countered those narratives. However, the social media platforms were too slow to respond. Our media monitoring noted that several private media outlets made efforts to offer a balanced coverage of elections, and there were talk shows with candidates in several constituencies. It was a positive practice that helped voters to make a really informed choice. However, the media reform process has been lacking, and news outlets still are vulnerable to pressures that foster self-censorship and reduce the space for analytical reporting. Our assessment of this historic election would be incomplete without acknowledging the importance of civil society. Many grassroots and national organizations made commendable efforts to restore public trust in the electoral process. 81 citizen observer groups were accredited to monitor the polls, adding to transparency. Young activists engaged in nationwide voter education activities aimed to close digital literacy gaps and advocated enhanced respect for human rights. Their voices are giving confidence in the democratic development. Ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, Bangladesh has made a pivotal step to restore public trust in democratic elections and good governance. However, there is still room and more work needed for refining this process. The newly elected parliament will have an important task in the months to come to meet voters' expectations and to continue with advancing the reform agenda. It is also time to abandon the old practices of excluding women from political arena or to solve political disputes with fists and not with ideas. Such practices no longer reflect the maturity of Bangladesh democracy. The new leadership of the country now has a unique opportunity to chart a new course, one that promotes independent institutions, respect for human rights and accountability. Bangladesh is now very well suited to set an example and ensure that the democratic process serves all its people. Our mission will contribute to observe the post-election environment. We will continue to observe our post-election environment, and we will publish a final report, including recommendations for future elections in the coming months. So let me conclude by saying that we really appreciate the the calm and the responsive way how political leaders have approached this post-election situations. And once again, thank you for your warm hospitality and for your collaboration. Thank you very much.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear all friends of democracy. It's my pleasure to address you today on behalf of our 7 members parliamentary delegation. My colleagues and I represent a large political spectrum and come from 6 different member states of European Union. We wish to express our gratitude to the Bangladeshi authorities for having invited us to observe this election. Equally, we warmly thank the people of this country for having made us feel so welcome during our time here. First, I want to express our full endorsement to the finding present today by my colleague, the Chief Observer Ivars Ijabs. I sincerely thank him for his excellent work and outstanding cooperation with him and his great team. During the past few days, we met with state authorities, including Chief Advisor Professor Yunus, the Election Commission, political party representatives, civil society organization, and also the media representatives. The Chief Observer has already given a detailed overview of the mission's preliminary finding and therefore want to focus on these issues that we
Komşularını